I think the answer to that would be that you would individuals would choose whether to contract into a proprietary community that involves democracy. So if these sort of, if you like, one example would be some of the private gated communities you have in the United States. And some of those have actually got their own constitutions, and you would choose whether to go into one that was got a democratic constitution. And the advantage of that would be it could be more dynamic than another community that was based on fixed rules, for example. So at least it could change to changing circumstances. Whereas the other alternative would be kind of like the hotel model, a kind of Disney World that you would choose to move into and live by the rules of that area that was controlled by a private company. So there are all different possibilities under sort of an anarcho-capitalist framework. No, I think they're more or less the same thing. I think personal freedom is essential to economic freedom and essential to economic prosperity as well. And if you look at Singapore, I mean, in a sense, it had a huge advantage because after the rise of communism in China, a lot of the very already wealthy merchants from places like Shanghai relocated to Singapore. So it's not kind of a typical place. It's like if you get, the best entrepreneurs from 1 billion people, or it's less than, but 500 million or whatever, and put them in one place, you're going to get a lot of dynamism no matter what. But I'd say that it's also to do with, they've also done well because of catching up with the West, and they've been able to copy the products that have been created by the individual freedom and the eccentricity, the innovation, etc. in the West. So I'd say empirically it is a problem if you only look at a few decades, but if you start looking in terms of centuries, then you see that it does fit the pattern that individual freedom is an important part of economic freedom, which in turn leads to economic prosperity. So I don't know if that answers your question. It can be sort of path dependent. It just depends on which particular leaders came into power in Singapore, etc. So you had Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, who was an authoritarian, and he imposed his particular policies on that government. So I mean, I wouldn't like to sort of try and explain discrete historical events in terms of economic theory. Well, I mean, that's one perspective that the government should do that, not necessarily, the only one. No, I think, at the moment we can be pretty pessimistic about the UK, and the coalition governments aren't really taking major steps to roll back the state. The education reforms might be a positive step, but at the same time, they don't include for-profit schools, so and they don't include selection either, so the main benefits are probably not going to be realised from that. So, but as I say, maybe in 10, 20 years' time, the sort of competition from East Asia could actually, and also the level of debt and borderline bankruptcy of the welfare state could create a shift to a more sensible sort of level of government. I think at least Stephen Duncan Smith and his team have identified some of the problems in terms of work incentives. But what worries me is there's a sort of leitmotif of egalitarianism in the coalition government. And a lot of their recent policies have actually made the work incentives even worse, like taking tax credits from the richer families and increasing them for the poorer families. And also, a lot of their planned stuff will actually increase public spending in the short run, things like their welfare to work program. And I don't think they've really got the bottle to actually cut the basic benefits, particularly child tax credits. And I think that is what will be needed to sort of make a serious attack on both the bankruptcy issue and also on the work incentives issue. So I'm pretty pessimistic about welfare reform, I'm afraid. Well, I disagree with you in the sense I think the underclass has been largely created by the welfare state and government action. In particular, they've undermined the extended family. They had these slum clearance programs where they stuck people in these isolated high-rise flats and on the edge of towns, etc., destroyed communities that had existed for centuries beforehand. So basically, I don't agree with your sort of underlying arguments. I think actually civil society, this is a popular part of the agenda at the moment, would actually thrive under a more libertarian system. So I don't think there's any contradiction there. No, that's a fair point. Obviously, it is a simplification. I mean, and a lot of the East Asian countries, South Korea, Taiwan, and so on, had a large level of government intervention, and it was heavily corporate with like in South Korea, the four main kaibatsu, like Samsung, these big companies in South Korea. But the point is, will that work? Will that sort of corporatist model work in the future? When they're not just mimicking the West's innovations and growing through that way, when they actually have to start from scratch and be finding new ways to create wealth. And I'm a bit skeptical about that. And of course, there's still the levels of regulation and the levels of government intervention in the economy are still probably much lower than they are in the West at the moment. So there's still a difference there that's worth mentioning. I think so. I mean, you saw it partly depends on the sort of constitution and the voting system and so on. So probably there's more hope when only property owners had the vote in the 19th century. But no, I think there is hope, and I think people are adaptable and they see sort of the wider picture. And if it's looking in 10, 20 years' time, even today, that the West is heading down the sort of South American route, these countries like Argentina and Uruguay that used to be among the richest in the world in 1900 are now very much in the second world. If people become aware of that possibility, then I think there probably could, the political agenda probably could change. And I think Margaret Thatcher's election was a good example of that, because things in the 70s had got just so bad that people reacted against some of the socialism. Having said that, though, there are huge vested interests that will act against any reform, and one of those is the aging population and all these pensioners who are getting these generous pension credits and various benefits. And I think the average age of an active voter by 2020 will be about 55, so that's a big worry that will act as a brake on cutting public spending and the role of the state.